Ciao tutti. Okay, that will be the end of the Italian component of the afternoon. Thank you all for being here on an incredibly beautiful Friday evening, so I know that's quite a sacrifice. First, I'd like to thank our director and our fearless leader, Professor Michele Bonino, the Dutch Embassy, the Biennale organization for putting this all together. It's been quite a remarkable week, and I think it will continue for the next few days or so, so thank you very much. As someone relatively new to Polito and Turin and Italy, it's really intimidating to be up here to present to everyone. But I'm incredibly honored and proud, I guess, to present a very good friend and my mentor, my architectural mentor, Reinier De Graaf. I can say with zero hesitation, he's probably the good and bad, probably the most influential teacher I ever had. Though I worked for him, I think it was my education to architecture and really how I still practice both teaching. And so to me, it's absolutely amazing. And what I think makes Reinier such an incredible teacher and an architect is he demonstrates what architecture can do, but more precisely what it should do as a writer, as a designer, as a, not a theorist, but as a thinker, you know. And I think the book and the presentation tonight, I think, will clearly demonstrate the outer limits of what architecture should be doing, not just making, but critiquing and making. So I think this is going to be quite incredible. And of course, you know, no introduction is complete without sort of the general platitudes one associates with a seminal architectural figure. So I'll give a little bit of a bio. He's a graduate of the TU Delft in the Netherlands. He graduated from the inaugural class at the Berlage Institute in Rotterdam, which is no longer existing. It was perhaps the last true architectural laboratory devoted to education and critique. Reinier is currently the senior-most partner at OMA. He's been there since 1996. He has led and leads projects throughout the world, Eastern and Western Europe, Northern Africa, the Middle East, Gulf, Russia, etc. And what's most also incredible, as he's been writing these books, he's also been responsible for probably some of the most important and critical architectural projects OMA has done since 2014, including, but not limited to, the Noordertoren in Stockholm, the NH Hotel in Amsterdam, the Holland Green project in London, the Timur House in Rotterdam, and the G-Star headquarters in Amsterdam. So this incredible production of incredibly high quality architecture, but through different mediums, writing, lecturing, building, etc., research, planning, is quite impressive, and I don't think he brags enough about it. But tonight, Reinier is going to present his latest book, which today we have available outside. It's the first ever, today is the Italian launch of Verb. So it's quite a nice coincidence. The book has been heralded critically, really well received. I just want to read a couple excerpts from reviews. One's from Jason Stone of Metropolis writes, "With dry wit, humor, and honesty, Reinier sets out to debunk the myths of contemporary architecture." Tim Abrahams of the Architectural Record wrote, "A compelling collection of essays, diary entries about De Graaf's life in architecture. No one else is identifying the problems or suggesting potential exits from them as wittingly or as intelligently as he is." And I think it's precisely because he is, first and foremost, a practicing architect. I think that gives it a seriousness and a credibility that maybe a lot of architectural writing does not have. But perhaps the best way to introduce my friend Reinier De Graaf is to simply do just that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Reinier De Graaf.
Thank you. I'm not going to be, and thanks for the invitation. I'm not going to be talking about any of the projects you mentioned. Actually, the nice thing is, and I didn't really realize it in full, that this is indeed a book launch. It's a book launch of a book that is a year old in English, but as of today exists in Italian, even though I still doubt whether the book is translatable in the first place, but that's another matter. The book is called Architect Verb in English, and it's a book not so much about architecture, but about the language that is currently being used in relation to architecture, particularly in the Anglo-Saxon world, and in my view, not always for the better. I think talking about architecture very often has a corrosive effect on architecture, and that's what I will try to demonstrate. So it's a book about language, and therefore a lecture about a book about language is going to take the form of a bit of an English class in the beginning, but please allow me the indulgence. The word architect, we all know it. Grammatically, the word architect is a noun. It is a countable noun. Its dictionary definition is a person whose job it is to design new buildings and make certain that they are built correctly. Sample sentence. After years of study, Tim, I'm really sorry Tim is a man, is now a fully fledged architect. Increasingly lately, however, we encounter the word architect not as a noun but as a verb. Again, a definition: to design and configure a software program or system. A few software packages were architected with Ethernet access in mind. Now that is the way the word architect exists in the world of computing. An architect by no means is the only word from the realm of architecture that has made its way into the digital world. There's in fact a whole series of words which have an architectural meaning, but at the same time have a metaphorical meaning in the digital world. Arena, blueprint, construct, framework, foundation, model, platform, scaffolding, sphere, stage, structure, and theater. All of these words exists in a way as the description of ideas and concepts, as much as they exist, let's say, as a literal definition of architecture elements. So that's the word architect verb as it exists in computing, and that's quite fine. I mean, it's a noun in the architecture world, it's a verb in the computing world, and just as long as those words remain, a firewalled separation world, there is not really that much wrong. However, the problem starts when words that have made their way into the digital realm start making their way back into the world of architecture. So what does the word architect verb mean in architecture? Architect verb, I guess, is the activity architects are considered to engage in. Sample sentence: I have to architect a solution that meets both the needs of the client and the constraints of the project budget. Not really very exciting. So one can wonder if the transition from noun to verb is really a form of trading up. The word architect as a noun has become a bit of a taboo. Increasingly frequently, just to get rid of the snobbishness that is associated with architects, it is replaced by the word built environment practitioner. Now, what is that? And it doesn't feature in the dictionary, it doesn't feature as any official definition. So when people talk about built environment practitioners, you kind of have to reconstruct its meaning from sample sentences you encounter in the press. Built environment practitioners must lead the fight against climate change. Now, just for argument's sake, let's say a built environment practitioner is a euphemism for an architect. That changes the sample sentence. Architects must lead the fight against climate change. Right. More about him later. So built environment, it's just one of very many words that exist the way they do. A built environment practitioner. There is also something like a successful building in the official colloquium. What is a successful building? A successful building is a building compliant with... Sorry? Should I start again? Let's just sort of yell into the void. Anyway. A successful building, its definition, a building compliant with a certain measure of success, commonly unspecified. Therefore, a successful building is a or any building. View-based urbanism. What is view-based urbanism? View-based urbanism practiced with a particular consideration for the optics which ensue in its wake. Therefore, urbanism. Real work. There's work that is real as opposed to work that is not. Therefore, work. So this is quite interesting that there are normally, you have a word in the dictionary and then you have an explanation. And normally the explanation is longer than the word. But increasingly frequently we get a situation where the words people use are actually longer than the explanation. So forward planning, well, any planning. So forward planning is planning. End state vision, goal. Driver for change, problem. Key driver, idea. Visual design, is there any other kind? Design. Non-visual design, a complete waste of anybody's time. So this is the kind of stuff the book sort of, the bubbles it tries to burst. So there is a wonderful thing. You can't quite do it in Dutch, you can't quite do it in Italian, I think, but you can do it in English, and that is that a word can simultaneously be a noun and a verb. That's a wonderful quality the English language has. So I already showed architect, a noun and a verb, but also the word concept, an abstract idea to generate concepts. Our team is concepting a whole new line of body products. Design, of course, a set of drawings showing or actually to make or draw plans for something. Even the word work in English is both a verb, to do a job, and a noun, a job done, which I guess accounts for the perpetual confusion that exists in any meeting with English people, where and it's particularly during COVID, where everybody sort of gazes into the camera, presuming everybody else has treated work as a verb, so they can treat it as a noun. So nobody knows, am I supposed to be working, commenting, blah, 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 blah. There are words, like green, that exist as a noun, an area planted with grass, green to make environmentally friendly, or even an adjective, a color. I think I'll get the green dress. So you can do very, very interesting things. This is a sample sentence, how you can translate English into English, or more specifically, prof speak. Let's say a relatively straightforward, politically correct sentence. Architects will try to design green buildings to further improve the quality of the environment. I guess perfectly okay. Kind of in modern speak, you translate that built environment practitioners, architect to green, green, green. So there we go. Smart sustainability, mindful built environment practitioners, architect to green, green, green. And there is a point when this new speak, in a way, turns into kind of Dada. It reminds you, in a way, of what Dada poetry was. The select use of words purely for their sound, divorced from meaning. And that, I think, is what a lot of contemporary speak has gotten to. It goes on. All of this is, I guess, relatively innocent and funny so far, but there is an undeniably sinister dimension, in my view, to the use of language. You have terms, but increasingly frequently, and we saw a bit of it already, you have an adjective with the term. So there is design. We know design as a noun. But there is also such a thing as people first design. What is people first design? That is design that puts people first. There is anticipatory design, design that preempts the future. There is narrative-driven design, design driven by a certain narrative. There is evidence-based design, design based on the application of knowledge that already exists. You could also say that it's a euphemism for unoriginal ideas most of the time. But there is that. There is emancipatory design, design with a specific focus on benefiting people disadvantaged because of disability, gender, or race. There is equitable design, design aimed at groups that have historically been underrepresented, taking into consideration gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, nationality, and abilities. See also emancipatory design. So that's an orgy of almost viciously good intentions. But you wonder, what is the scorched earth that remains in the wake of these adjectives? What remains of design, after there is such a thing as emancipatory narrative driven design, design by default, without the adjectives, becomes something bad. It becomes a nearsighted, whimsical, semi-immoral act with no rationale that hinders emancipation, is oblivious to the underrepresented, ignores the facts, and puts people last. And the people associated with design, those are these guys. Criminals by default, and anybody who doesn't engage in virtue signaling is get left behind and condemned very often here. Just a random selection from the press. Ajay Associates, I mean, believe it or not, this is all from before the things happened that happened when they happened. Ajay Associates, Sydney Community Centre informed by Aboriginal concepts. Ajay Associates designs a Brooklyn community centre to disrupt the racial wealth gap, right? And then here, Yasmin Lari, the winner of the RIBA Gold Medal, is kind of basically has a claim to fame as the most vocal critic of actually her own work. Formerly an architect of brutalist buildings, I really had to shed the ego. And now I think of myself, what a terror I was when I designed these shiny corporate buildings. So this is endless. This is the mood that prevails at the moment. Diller and Scafidio, again, an Aboriginal art culture centre for Adelaide. HCMA and indigenous design principles in British Columbia student housing. I can't see any. And then, interesting, you know, even formerly perfectly respectable narcissist now indulge in this kind of demonstration of good. And it's like the whole world of architecture has come together to profess their moral cause. And it reminds me of a trend earlier in music, We Are the World. Ghastly, and the echo is in some ways, I guess, uncanny. Don't know who he is. Anyway, sustainability can't be like some sort of moral sacrifice or political dilemma or philanthropic cause. It has to be a design challenge. And for that, he has developed another term with another adjective, which is hedonistic sustainability, the admixture of environmental ecology and fun, two commonly thought incompatible phenomena. Organized fun for the ecologically aware. Now, hedonism is a very old word. It's an old Greek word. Hedonism means the belief that pleasure is the most important thing in life. The hedonistic philosophy of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. In case you wonder what that looks like, this is what hedonism looks like. And it always did. That is the curious thing, it always did. So anyway, that's the book. Anyway, this is the book. The book has as a subtitle, The New Language of Building. That is not the subtitle I wanted it to have, but the American publisher didn't do irony, so this is the subtitle we ended up with. But the original subtitle was this, Architect Verb, the ultimate guide to world-class, award-winning, innovative, creative, sustainable, livable, and beautiful buildings that foster a sense of place and well-being. And you know, when you put all the virtuous terms in a single sentence, only then does the absurdity become fully manifest. So the book is organized in a sequence of these 10 absurdities. Mantra, words that have dominated the architectural discourse for the last 25 years in the 21st century. Starting with starchitecture, the belief that architects were magicians, near godlike creatures who could single-handedly change the fate of entire cities. Ending with innovation, you know, the nerds in Silicon Valley planning for the definitive redundancy of the figure of the architect altogether. And I guess the book inhabits a kind of comfortable space in between. I know from personal experience that star architects do not exist, or at least if you're close enough to one, that the myth sort of crumbles with great delight. And therefore I have a sort of strange conviction that since number 1 doesn't exist, that number 10 will never happen. Anyway, I want to just show a little bit of the book in illustrated form, if I may. So, star architecture, it's a chapter that actually deals with the Bilbao effect. From the moment that anonymous architects nobody knew created masterpieces, to the point in time where actually the figure of the architect is almost more present than his creation, or where the creation in a way serves as a signature left throughout the world to note the presence of the architect. For the longest time, this building got the sole credit for changing the fate of an entire city. Now, much of the chapter is dedicated that is not what really happened, that there was a coalescence of European funding, a changing of time, local policies, etc., etc. The Guggenheim as an institution that all came together, that in a way did a lot for Bilbao, but that it's certainly not the building alone. And in some ways, the effect that has been attributed to that building ultimately has been to the detriment of architect, because the building got credit that it could single-handedly create 25 million visitors and create a revenue for the city of 6.5 billion, which is of course a nice compliment to get. But once you demonstrate it as being able to do that, people will expect it for you with every next museum that gets built, and it's a daunting obligation that it results in. So what happens is that every European city after Bilbao, if buildings apparently make that much money, then buildings, this Imperial War Museum in Manchester, can run over budget, double over budget. West Bromwell Alsop, the public, double over budget. Fine Arts Science Centre in Walter, hired Diet, from 67 million to 79 million. Musée de Confluence in Lyon by Koop Himmelblad, 61 million to 255.4 million. Peter Eisenman, about 100 million, ending up 400 million. And Santiago Calatrava, the absolute champion of budget overruns, with the Cité of Arts and Sciences in Valencia, racking up nearly $1 billion for the building, and then you get close to the projected revenue that you're supposed to make for a city is then preemptively consumed by buildings. So all of that clearly lasted for a while, created a lot of well-known buildings, but exhausted, in a way, the belief in that effect. Is the Bilbao effect over? This is more than 2 decades later. Is it over? Actually, is it over? Because instead of star architects, we currently have another term which is called world class. And no longer is it architecture itself, but it is a more crude way to mark one's present in the world. This is another anecdote. World class, this is world class. Simply, when you're higher, taller, fatter thing than anything else in the world, when you set a record. This is the Burj Khalifa in Dubai by SOM, finished in 2010. But then, of course, neighboring Emirate Abu Dhabi had to make its mark as well. Now, it's quite costly. It's quite difficult to, build an even taller building than that. So what they did instead is that they decided to sort of create a record of their own. So while Dubai has the tallest building in the world, Capitol Gate has the largest man-made leaning structure in the world. And the addition man-made is very, very important, because there are structures in the world that lean farther, but all of them happen because of forces of nature and not because the architects designed them so. But here that's the case. So 18 degrees, this is a book. This is a book by the author signing his book, 18 degrees, and this is the record that the Guinness World Records gave to it. An officially awesome building because it leans. And the interesting thing is that, of course, by far not the only building that features in the Guinness Book of World Records. I mean, increasingly many buildings create records of their own. There's the Pentagon as the largest office building for the longest of time. There is the largest mirrored building in the desert of Saudi Arabia by Giaforma. There is the most slender tower in Dallas. There is the highest outdoor infinity pool in Dubai. Again, there's the first artificial fog building. there is the largest indoor Ferris wheel, there is the largest roof in the shape of a star, there is the largest building in the shape of a picture frame, there is the largest building in the shape of a shoe, and even the ugliest building in the United Kingdom features as a record. Drake Circus Shopping Centre in Plymouth. So that's not actually in the Guinness Book of Record, though. That is something else. That is an annual award that the British public gives to the most ugly building that's been finished in the year. And it's called the Carbuncle Cup, after Prince Charles' famous Carbuncle speech. So this is the cup, like a devil with horns. And it brings me to the next word in the book, excellence, the quality of being excellence. Now, the world of architecture is terrorized by prizes and awards lately. The first ever prize that was given was the Prix de Rome. The Prix de Rome in 1720, followed not long after by branches in the Netherlands and Belgium, the Rieber Gold Medal in the mid-19th century, going on AIA in the early 20th century, Jefferson Medal in the early 60s, Alto Medal, and the list just kept going. Longer until today we have countless architectural awards. Most of these awards honor figures. Some of these awards honor projects. What all of these awards do mostly is that either the figure is a modern architect or the work of architecture is a modern building. And since that happened, since that was written about, that sparked outrage, and that sparked a whole wave of other awards, which were kind of like a revenge on the modern awards. This is the Palladio Awards, and the laureates are considerably older. This is the Richard Dryhouse Prize by Prince Charles, the Vincent Scully Award, etc., etc. But it's a series of awards which has been conceived almost in retaliation to the modern awards, to the fact that today we almost have as many awards as we have projects. In fact, we may have more awards than we have projects. So it's no longer projects and architects competing for awards, it's awards competing for architects. There is the Women in Architecture Awards, of course, perfectly okay. There is the Young Architects Award. There is the Emerging Architect Award. There is the Ethical Architecture Award. And finally, there is even the Non-Architecture Award, sort of any other business. But by far, the largest subject of award in the world is, of course, this. It's the subject of sustainability. It is the most featured category in all of the worlds. And let's talk about sustainability. This is the Palazzo Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, evidently. It has bike racks, that building. It has room cards that tell you when towels need to be replaced. Landscape that doesn't use grass. It has parking fuel for efficient cars. Because of that, it got a LEED certificate. So this, believe it or not, is an extremely sustainable building. And because it got a LEED award, it got a 27 million tax break. That inspired buildings and clients throughout the United States to do similar things, to opt for different tax breaks, which in a way led, similar to the awards, to a plethora of certificates in a way to testify that buildings are green, with an ever longer list of criteria before, but all of these lists are about as long as they're meaningless. And that, in a way, brings me to something else. The language that is being used in relation to architecture today is often vague. I mean, they are things you cannot be against. No architect would want to be unlivable, design ugly buildings, etc., etc. But the vagueness of the term is somehow compensated by rankings and extensive lists of numerical evidence of things that are essentially unquantifiable. This is the weird paradox. So you see livability, and then you see a ranking as though it is an objectively felt phenomena. There is something like well-being, which has a similar ranking. There is creativity, which has also a very elaborate ranking. And even something like beauty is being objectified with scoring boards, rankings, and numerical evidence in its wake. Specific designs that are beautiful for some sort of very percentage and numerical reasons. This is the Living with Beauty report commissioned by the Conservative government in England. Very often related to place. Place is in a way directly related to beauty. What makes a great place? And this for me is the most fascinating term in the current discourse on architecture. It's called placemaking. It's not English, but it is English. The word doesn't exist. It doesn't feature in any dictionary. Until recently, when you typed it in Microsoft Word, you got a red wrinkle indicating a spelling mistake, yet everybody used the word, as though it was a commonplace. So this particular chapter in the book is just simply a little travelogue of me trying to find out the meaning of the word and still not being, I guess, fully successful in the end. This is a Wikipedia definition. It's about 150 words long. It has a bit about a cycling path, but it's still not clear. This is almost the clearest definition. When you put a piano in a public space, you make a place of that space. So this is another definition from the inventor of the term, and also the most important promoter and businessman that uses the term, Fred Kent. Placemaking is an innate ability that we all have. But if that's the case, then also this is placemaking, I guess. Anyway, since this is the Biennale Tecnologica, I wanted to end on innovation. There's a little bit of a twist to the whole thing. And I think when you talk of innovation, I mean, anything you conjure up about it, anything you theorize about it is already out of the date by the time you've finished writing. But I guess what is on everybody's mind today is, of course, artificial intelligence and the extent to which our profession as a whole will have a future after those developments will have run their course. Now, there are many programs already, Midjourney, DALL-E, and they create shockingly rapid results, whatever you think about it, and a very interesting almost breed of architecture, or a crossbreed of architecture, I should say. This is UN Studio meeting falling water. Architecture as whipped cream, pairing shells, a timber cave, Eric Mendelssohn meeting Stefano Bueri. This is crème brûlée with a front door. This is an inhabited water lily. This is Gaudi in red. This is Gaudi dressed up as Turkish pastry. This is Gaudi suffering from some terrible disease. This is tropical Gaudi. This is a timber building that eats flesh. This is that same timber building after it's been fed. This is a sort of Hundertwasser, which has been in the fridge for too long and got moldy, and it's marvelous. I mean, the act of creation is truly revolutionized through AI. Let's say I use Midjourney and I prompt it. I can use a number of words. Let's say I use random, incompatible words. Organic, Art Deco, mixed use, Gothic. And this is what you get. At your service, sir. This is Palladio residential Darth Vader. Doable. I sort of don't really want to know what the prompt on this building was. So an interesting crossover between a bed and a tomb, a kind of fetish for necrophiles, I guess. This is a swooping stair somehow imported from Trump Tower by the looks of it, poor man's idea of a rich man. And this is digital ornament. And it's nice, if you drive digital ornament to the extreme, it becomes like a building that is in drastic need of maintenance. You know, cobwebs all over the place. Ornament is an interesting one. Ornament is an interesting one because I think something is about to happen that will really create a drastic overhaul of architecture and how it's produced. The rapid invention and creation of ornament through AI is currently matched by the possibility of production of ornament through 3D printing. Once you take the two major innovations in the construction industry at the moment and you short-circuit them, you know, Adolf Loos' essentially moral condemnation of ornament as a wasteful, time-consuming indulgence becomes an indulgence that takes no time whatsoever. So Ornament und Verbrechen becomes simply ornament. And this man, in the twilight of his career, is absolutely ecstatic about that. Robert Stern, you know, all he's ever tried is now simply the result of a touch of a fingertip. I look back to buildings and ideas from the past to refresh them in order to go forward. This enables us to fit our buildings into established architectural contexts. You can do whatever at the touch of a fingertip. You can do an alto, an ondo, a Borromini, a Brunelleschi, and even a Mario Botta can be you know, brought back to life. Things are not as easy, though, as some of this suggested. There is quite an elaborate process of prompt crafting involved in doing all of this. I don't understand the first damn thing about this, but I have been told it's a lot of work. There are infinite amount of prompts to achieve a single result. This is well, one slide from an extremely long lecture of Patrick Schumacher on the subject, but we've kind of been here before. You know, this promise of early retirement, this promise of happily ever after and no longer work involved. And generally what happens is something else. I remember the early days of the introduction of AutoCAD. And I remember that too was thought a moment where, you know, entire halls full of drawing boards, an enormously laborious process of architectural drawing, revision, etc., would all change. What has in fact happened is that the speed of production has only fed the expectations, so that instead of working less, I think today we probably work more than in the days before there was AutoCAD. And there is some very sinister prediction. You know, artificial intelligence solves problem we don't have. Some sinister predictions about what it means to be an architect in the future. Cultural workers would then be forced to choose between two unattractive career paths, either working as supervisors of an ever more automated machine, producing interchangeable content around the clock, as you have seen, or marketing themselves as individuals. And in case there is any doubt, the latter option is the more tragic option. Kind of as a note of caution, the world's first completely AI-designed building exists. It's the Shenzhen Bay International Hotel, and it looks remarkably unspectacular, I think. And I don't know what the prompts were that went into this, but there is something, you know, of a perpetual promise about it. Anyway, that's to give you a flavor of the book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reinier. As usual, it's quite good. Are there any questions, or I could start it off? Is there any? I mean, I would like to give the audience as much time as possible. Does anyone have a question they would like to offer? Okay, then I shall begin. Well, thank you, Reinier, again for this talk. And you know, this is, you know, I like to. It's evolved quite a bit since maybe the first time you touched on it in Skopje. I find it interesting that you begin with language, and we talk about language, really about language, but then there's this component in which language is becoming more important than, say, drawing, per se, right? Like the ability to write scripts or prompts is really, really, really important. So as we sort of created an education that really, let's say, de-emphasizes writing, de-emphasizes sort of thinking through writing, writing becomes more important than ever. And so I guess my question is how almost always been a language. When we were there, I think language was incredibly, incredibly important. Being precise with words. And I think what's interesting about confusion is very few of us were speaking our maternal language. almost everyone was speaking a second language, and I think this sort of forcefulness of not speaking your native language created a clarity, right? So I guess, I don't know, the question then is, how important is it still, language in practice? Because this is really a critique of language, but then also language is incredibly important to a firm like OMA and yourself.
Yeah, I don't know, but we well, let's say in the creative process, as I knew it, language is important, but language was mainly important to retroactively justify, contextualize, and give meaning to certain decisions that were essentially taken from the gut. I mean, OMA, and you know this, once you're actually on the inside, is a supremely illiterate context. Words come out of the office, but they in a way come out as a wall of fortification to what you could call a kind of free space. You know, where many things can exist, even if they don't seem particularly logical or even sometimes outright mad at the start. Language, in a way, serves the purpose of a suspension of disbelief. Now, what you see in recent times is that language, if it's a fortification wall for us, language from the other side is being mobilized as, you know, as an attack, and you know, and the extent to which our language will continue to serve as a kind of iron dome remains to be seen, because none of the language that is being projected onto architecture endures any counterposition. You know, livable, clearly you want to be livable. Well-being, I mean, I wouldn't wish anybody not to be well. I mean, in case I created that impression in the talk, that is not the case. But the problem is that all of these terms do not permit an antonym. The only thing they permit is a kind of rat race to who is most in favor of well-being. And because they only spark agreement and they, in a way, create a contest of who can agree with who most, this is what you see in contemporary talk show. That is a very, very dangerous space for the space of creation, which is essentially wordless. Or which is essentially allows, you know, and a hunch to take primacy over an explanation. You know, for an explanation to exist, there always needs to be something to explain. An explanation doesn't ever create the thing. You know, and it's this mixed order that I find supremely worrying and that I've tried to address.
Yeah, there's something in I think it's in the chapter on the 18 degrees, where you say, the more it's explained, the more confused I become.
Yeah.
And I think that this is quite clear, and it's also, yeah, it's a combination of people wanting clarity, but then it's like, so do you think the architects like Bjarke, do you think they know they're doing this? Is it one of these, or do they, I mean this is a weird question because you can't answer what he thinks. No. But okay, how about internally? Because maybe some of you all inside OMA are doing this a bit. Yeah?
But what's the question?
So are we aware of its irrelevance? Are we, even though all these awards, we're submitting, every architect that's practicing submits these awards. These awards exist because you pay these $600 fees.
It's a business model.
Yeah.
And to be aware of something doesn't mean you can reject it altogether. I mean, the job of an architect is considerably different than that of a journalist. Although even journalists have to toe the line with whoever owns the paper, by the way, or an artist, etc. But I mean, there is no architecture without engagement. And therefore, if the prevailing mood is such and such and such, you have no choice but to engage. And I don't think there is necessarily morality in the whether or not you engage. I think the morality resides in what you do once you have engaged. You know, that's the whole, you look at the world. That used to be exactly the art of politics. You know, we used to have diplomacy. We don't have diplomacy anymore. We just have opinions that we voice ever louder to people who have other opinions. And its volume increasingly takes the place of clarity. And I think it creates ultimately politically, but also in the creative process, a real dire situation of stagnation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this book also, I think, if there could easily be a follow-up that addresses, say, education. Like a lot of these things, I think, easily, maybe not so much in Italy, but definitely in the UK, and for sure in the United States, this chasing of these awards, the creation of courses to essentially create labor. But then, it's nice to focus on the profession, but I also think this could also expand to architecture in all its different forms. But
it's, you know, the moment you start, the original title of this book was Measures of Success.
Right.
It sounded like a management book. But the moment you start to measure something,
right,
that is the first moment freedom goes. You know, if you start to count how frequently you make love, that is the beginning of the end of a love life. Sorry, I don't have a better example, but I guess it makes the point. Livability, happiness, I find that a perfect example. You know, once that becomes a quantifiable thing, freedom of choice is removed, and for me, it's measuring, you know, ultimately human values which are immeasurable,
right,
which we hold sacred, which maybe we should hold sacred. Expressing them in figures is also the first moment they are totally incorporated into the market economy.
Right.
They become monetizable. You know, whatever is measured needs to perform. Mm-hmm. When it's measured less well against something else, it needs to outperform, etc. And that's where it begins. And once you have to, you know, the race is the first moment where you're totally vectorized.
right.
And all of these things, which in a way should be free spaces, are vectorized to an incredibly worrying extent.
Yeah. I think one of the things, especially in the book, because this is an overview of the book, but what the book does, I think, incredibly well is also provide a genealogy, if you will, of these terms. Like the idea of livability, you mentioned how it's actually something that was created by consulting groups. Right?
Well, the idea of livability was, it's interesting. It emerged from the days of Jane Jacobs. Mm-hmm. And it started as a protest movement in North American cities, mm-hmm. particularly Vancouver, against highway projects through the middle of the city, as you know, as they used to make them in those days. And then people protested in the name of livability to stop a motorway. And they succeeded in the case of Vancouver. Then where there was going to be a motorway, there was a neighborhood. The neighborhood became very popular. The formula was discovered by the whole world. They started to market livability as a political current, so the protest movement became a political party. Vancouver was discovered as a model of success and as a livable city. Therefore, every property developer, every property purchaser, every real estate speculant in a way started to acquire property there. Its monetizable value was discovered, which means that in today's Vancouver, nobody can afford an apartment. So the most livable city in the world is a city where nobody can afford to live. And that is how the vicious cycle, you know, sometimes the discovery of these terms is the beginning of their destruction.
Yeah. And there's definitely a demographic correlation, let's say, to livability.
Yeah, or a cycle.
Yeah. Any questions? Yes. The microphone's coming over there.
Hello, Reinier. Congratulations on your presentation. I actually have two questions. So the first one is...
You want to stand up?
Yeah, sure. Do you think that this need to find new words to express what a design actually is in some ways compensating the fact that we can't truly find new aesthetically pleasing designs that are considered generally pleasing? And the second question is a question that, it touches me more personally. What do you think about engineers and how is your work with engineers? Thank you.
Okay.
So what do you think about engineers?
Yeah, let me think. I don't think we necessarily need two words. People have asked me, what do you hope to achieve with your book? And what I ideally hope is that I can introduce 10 words which are forbidden to use from here on. But I'm under no illusion that that will ever happen or that I have the authority to do so. But what I hope to achieve is that those same words that the people who use them might become slightly more red-faced, that they might become slightly more shame-faced whenever they use them, so that the confidence is eroded somewhat. I've always loved working with engineers because they represent something which I'm very envious of as an architect. The notion of a certain objectivity. One of the things that bothers me immensely about architecture is its incredibly arbitrary, willful nature. And in that sense, if I would welcome AI, for instance, I would really like interior design could be completely delegated to AI. The moment anything with taste enters the equation, the entire mostly Italian populated interior department of our office, we could just wipe them out of the office and replace them by AI. That is something that I would find terrific. But the question was about engineers. So I like engineers for their objectivity, for in a way the absence of taste, which certainly applies to most engineers. But then engineers in current times have an irritating tendency, as engineers in China and India and God knows where get better in terms of constructing buildings. Engineers today morph in, particularly British engineers, they morph into being consultancy firms. And then they become the proponents precisely of the language that I would like to ban. So in general, positive about engineers, but not so lately.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. I just would like to share an observation, just to know if you agree or not. So, some way I realized that this distortion of the language you described today was often or mostly dedicated to the out of our profession, to newspaper, to the public opinion, to the clients, to the general public language. And I think this is not really new. Architects always told stories and make some kind of deformation of the real content of their projects. So you show very well how now it is exaggerated, but it's not really a new language. What, in my feeling, what is happening now, and that we are creating this distortion and this confusion also among us. So between architects or between architects and engineers, between experts. So when we need to be efficient, we need to understand each other quickly and to go on, to make progress on our work, I realize that very often we don't understand so much what we are sharing because of the same use, distorted use of the language. I don't know if you agree or...
Well, in as much as I understand, I think I agree. But I think part of so my first book was about the bullshit of architects projected onto the world. The last book is about the bullshit projected by the world onto architecture. And in that sense, I think it's a symmetrical oeuvre. But the language, or what I call prof speak, it has also come about at a time where there is more and more specialists involved in building a building. There is financial cost consultants, engineers, mechanical engineers, wayfinding people, and architects. And to some extent, the terms like sustainability, they're also a kind of lingua franca, so that they can understand each other. You know, you can talk in that type of language to each other forever without ever realizing you actually don't agree. So you know, the social oil of meetings, it all keeps it going. You know, this is the kind of language. At long last, there is the prospect of world peace. You know, if we all use that language, because it buries a lot of disagreements under the rugs. But then, what these terms actually mean for you almost becomes a matter of a private conviction. You know, it's like what religion has become in a democracy. Our private interpretation of the term sustainability is in a professional context. So it allows things to carry on without ever knowing in what direction they're actually had it, you know, and a lot of work is about not being productive, but simply about being socialized into a professional sphere that keeps itself going. And I think, the worrying thing is, a lot of these terms come from, you know, the world of finance, sociology, extraneous domains that projected onto architecture, but then architects internalize them as though they are their own terms. And it's almost like many Dutch people, for instance, think they speak excellent English, and they profess the most moronic sentences at airports, in restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a little bit similar of architects using the language of sociology, you get a similar kind of illiterate use of the language.
I want to is there another question? Is there one? I want to just briefly ask one more thing. I think it's interesting that there seems like there's a correlation between the absence of a user and the rise of the consultant.
Yeah.
Because you know, there's obviously clear moments we're very familiar with how the market works, but could you talk about that a bit? About you know, when SOM was doing these mid-century modern pieces of absolutely gorgeous building, Inland Steel, Seagram's, Pepsi-Cola, Caterpillar, they interviewed employees, they interviewed the CEOs. There was a progressive tax rate where if they didn't, you know, they would tax them 80% of their profits, so they invested back into making buildings, right? Because it's still like it's a residential home for a corporation. But more often than not, we're working for private equity.
Well,
and do you think it's the absence of a client or a user that's creating these different voices to tell us what to do?
I think the sequence has reversed. Particularly, I think there is a moment in time when you can definitively say that before that moment, the focus was on building costing money, and after that moment, the focus was on buildings making money. Buildings were discovered as a form of return on investment. You could build to make money. The moment that happened, I think, was also the moment the market economy definitively became triumphant, and the initiative to build was relegated from the public sector to the private sector. You know, if you look at entire cities, you look at cities in the Middle East, they are not built for a demographic that is there. They are built so they will attract a particular demographic. So buildings are built in the hope of acquiring a user, rather than for a user with pre-specified requirements. And you know, when you don't know the user, you still need requirements, and that's where consultants come in.
Yeah, because they're going to.
You know, because they claim to know the anonymous mass that will eventually populate the buildings, just in the same way stockbrokers claim to know whether the stocks are going up sideways or in circles. Right. It's the kind of you know, there is nothing more monetizable than to profess knowing the unknowable.